We are continuing our book, Secret of the Old Mill. We are on chapter 5, The Bicycle. Joe ran downstairs to the front door, flung it open, and dashed outside. He reached the end of the walk and peered in the direction the mysterious cyclist had taken. The person was not in sight. Puzzled, Joe went back slowly to the house. Had the stranger come there by mistake? If not, what did he want? Joe wondered. The rest of the Hardy family had been awakened by Joe's cries to the stranger. By this time, they were clustered at the doorway, and all the lights in the house were on. "What's the matter, Joe?" Aunt Gertrude demanded. "Who were you calling to at this unearthly hour?" Joe was about to reply when he noticed a large white envelope protruding from the mailbox. He pulled it out and saw that his father's name was typed on the front. "This is for you, Dad." Joe handed the envelope to Mr. Hardy. "That fellow on the bike must have left it." Joe was besieged with questions, and he explained what had happened. "It's a funny way to deliver a message," Frank commented. "Very suspicious, if you ask me," Aunt Gertrude snapped. Suddenly, they all noticed that Mr. Hardy was frowning at the contents of the envelope, a plain piece of white paper. "What does it say, Fenton?" Mrs. Hardy asked anxiously. He read the typed message. "Drop case, or else danger for you and family." There was a silence for a moment. Then Aunt Gertrude exclaimed, "I knew it! We can't get a decent night's sleep with 3 detectives in the family. I just know there's real trouble brewing." Although she spoke tartly, the others realized Miss Hardy was concerned, as always, for her brother's safety. "Now don't worry, Gertrude," Fenton Hardy said reassuringly. "The boys and I will be on guard against any danger. This note probably is the work of a harmless crank." Aunt Gertrude tossed her head as though she did not believe this for a moment. "Let's all look around for clues to the person on the bike," Frank suggested. Flashlights were procured, and the entire family searched the grounds thoroughly on both sides of the stoop and the walk. As Frank and his aunt neared the end of the front walk, Miss Hardy cried out, "There's something next to that bush!" Frank picked up an object. "A bicycle pedal," he exclaimed. "Auntie, this is a terrific clue. I think we have 4 detectives in the family." His aunt forced a rather embarrassed smile. "The pedal must have fallen off the bike Joe saw," Frank said. "That's why it swerved." Back in the house, the family gathered in the kitchen. They were too excited to go back to bed immediately, and the boys were eager to question their father. They all had cookies and lemonade. "What case did this warning refer to?" Joe asked Mr. Hardy. "I can't be sure," the detective replied slowly. Again, the boys wondered about Mr. Hardy's secret case and longed to know what it involved. "Maybe the threat is connected with that one," Frank thought. Before the boys went to sleep, they decided to track down the pedal clue early the next morning. Right after breakfast, Chet telephoned. He told Frank, who took the call, that his sister Iola and her friend Callie Shaw had offered to pack lunch if they could go along on the picnic. "Swell," Frank said enthusiastically. Callie was his favorite date. "In the meantime, how'd you like to do some sleuthing with us?" "Sure, what's up?" Frank quickly told Chet about the excitement of the previous night. "Meet us here as soon as you can." When Frank and Joe informed Mr. Hardy of their plan to trace the pedal, he nodded approval. "I must go out of town for a short while," he said, "but first, I'd like to examine the warning note in the lab." The boys went with him to their fully equipped laboratory over the garage. Mr. Hardy dusted the note carefully, but when he blew the powder away, there was no sign of a fingerprint. Holding the note up to the light, Mr. Hardy said, "There's no watermark. Of course, this is not a full sheet of paper." "Dead end so far," Joe frowned. "If we could only locate the typewriter this message was written on." Shortly after Mr. Hardy had driven off in his sedan, Chet arrived. "Where to, fellas?" he asked as they set off in the Queen. Center of town, Joe replied. On the way, the brothers briefed Chet on their plan, which was to make inquiries at all the bicycle supply stores. In the first four they visited, Frank showed the pedal and asked if there had been any requests for a replacement that morning. All the answers were negative. Finally, at the largest supply store in Bayport, they obtained some helpful information. This particular pedal comes from a bike made in Belgium, the proprietor said. There isn't a store in town that carries parts for it. The boys were disappointed. As Frank put the pedal back in his pocket, he asked the proprietor where parts for the Belgian bicycle could be purchased. It might be worth your while to check over in Bridgeport, the man said. I think you'll find trailers handles them. It's an odd coincidence, Frank remarked when the boys were back in the car. We've come across two Belgian bikes in 2 days. When they reached the trailer store in Bridgeport, the young detectives learned they had just missed a customer who had purchased a pedal for a Belgian bike. Who was he? Frank inquired. I don't know. What did he look like? Joe asked. The proprietor's brow wrinkled. Sorry, I was too busy to pay much attention, so I can't tell you much. As far as I can remember, he was a tall boy, maybe about 14. The three friends knew this vague description was almost useless. There probably were hundreds of boys living in the surrounding area who fitted that description. As the boys reached the street, Joe said determinedly, We're not giving up. Hey, Chet reminded his friends, it's almost time to pick up the girls. Within an hour, the five young people were turning off the highway onto a side road paralleling Electon's east fence. A little farther on, Chet made a right turn and followed the dirt road that led to the rear entrance of the plant. Any luck sleuthing? Pretty, brown-eyed Callie Shaw asked the Hardys. What makes you think we're sleuthing? Oh, I can tell, Callie said, her eyes twinkling. You two always have that detective gleam in your eyes when you're mixed up in a mystery. They certainly have, Iola agreed, laughing. When they reached a grove bordering Willow River, which was to their left, Chet pulled over. I'll park here. The girls had decided they would like to see the changes which had been made to the old mill. As the group approached Electon's gatehouse, they were amazed at the transformation. No longer did the mill look shabby and neglected. The three-story structure had been completely repainted and the weeds and overgrowth of years cleared away. The grounds and shrubbery of the whole area were neatly trimmed. Look, said Frank, there's the mill wheel. As the Hardys and their friends watched the huge wheel turning, they felt for a moment that they were living in the olden days. Water which poured from a pond over a high stone dammed on the south side and through an elevated mill race caused the wheel to revolve. Oh, Callie exclaimed admiringly as she spotted a little bridge over the stream from the falls. It looks just like a painting. About 300 yards from the north side of the mill was a closed rear gate to Electon's ultra-modern plant. Some contrast between old and the new, Joe remarked as they left the dirt road and walked up the front path to the gatehouse. Suddenly, the door opened and a dark-haired, muscular man in uniform came out to meet them. What can I do for you? He asked. I'm the gate guard around here. I'd like to apply for a summer job at Electon, Chet told him. Have you an appointment? No, replied Chet. I guess I should have phoned first. The guard agreed. You would have saved yourself time and trouble, he said. I'm sure there aren't any openings, especially for temporary help. Well, couldn't I go in and leave an application with personnel manager? Chet asked. The guard shrugged. Tell you what, I'll phone the personnel office instead, he offered, and went back into the mill. While they waited, the five looked around. At the south side of the mill grounds, a slender, graying man who wore overalls was clipping the low hedges. Look, Callie, said Iola, pointing towards the spot near the hedge. Isn't that quaint? An old flour barrel with ivy growing out of it. Charming, Callie smiled. The girls and boys started over towards the mill for a closer inspection. At that same moment the guard came to the door. Just as I told you, he called out to Chet. No openings. Sorry. Too bad, Chet, Joe said sympathetically. Well, at least you can keep on relaxing. Despite his disappointment, Chet grinned. Right now I'm starved. Let's go down to the river and have our picnic. He thanked the guard and the young people started to walk away. Suddenly Frank stopped and looked back at the mill. Propped against the south wall was a bicycle. Quickly he ran over to examine it. This looks like a Belgian model, Frank thought. Sure is, he told himself. The same type Ken Blake has. On impulse, Frank pulled the pedal from his pocket and compared it to those on the bike. They matched exactly. Frank noticed that one of the pedals looked much less worn than the other, as if it had been replaced recently, he reflected, wondering excitedly if someone had used this bicycle to deliver the warning note. And could this be Ken's? The young detective asked himself. He inspected the front wheel spokes. None was twisted, but several had slight dents. They could have been straightened out easily, Frank reasoned, and the paint scratches on the fender touched up. He felt his heart beat faster as he waved his companions to join him. When Frank pointed out the clues to his brother, Joe agreed immediately. It could be the bicycle which was used to deliver the message. Joe was interrupted by a strange voice behind them. Pardon me? But why are you so interested in that bike? Frank quickly slipped the pedal into his pocket as the group swung around to face the speaker. He was the man who had been clipping the hedges. Because just yesterday we met a boy, Ken Blake, who was riding a bike of the same model. We don't often see this Belgian make around. For a moment the man looked surprised and then smiled. Of course. Ken works here, does odd jobs for us around the mill. You must be the boys he met yesterday when he was delivering some copy to the printer. Yes, Frank replied. When we asked Ken about his job, he was very secretive. Well, the maintenance man said, he has to be. This plant is doing top secret work. All of us have been impressed with the necessity of not talking about electing at all. Is Ken around? Joe asked nonchalantly. We'd like to say hello. I'm afraid not, was the reply. We sent him by bus this afternoon to do an errand. He won't be back until later. The man excused himself and resumed his clipping. We'd better eat, Iola giggled. My poor brother is suffering. I sure am. Chet rolled his eyes, laughing. The picnickers started away. Joe, who was in the rear, happened to glance up at the front of the mill. He was startled to catch a glimpse of a face at one of the second-story windows. He stopped in his tracks. Ken Blake, Joe said to himself. As the young sleuth stared, mystified, the face disappeared from the window. And that is the end of chapter 5. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you for chapter 6.